They poured into the streets in front of the White House and other places across the United States, dancing, singing, and waving flags to celebrate the death of one man, Osama bin Laden. Many in the jubilant crowd were in elementary or middle school when the 9/11 attacks happened. But what's the response of thoughtful Christians to the killing of public enemy number one? Well, to find out, let's welcome Reverend Christine Chakoian, senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Lake Forest. And we also welcome Sarah Bruni, a junior at Lake Forest College and a member of First Presbyterian Church. And we also welcome Anna Shostitsky, a recent University of Chicago graduate. What was your first response when you heard that bin Laden had been killed?
I felt a great sense of relief, actually. I thought it was something that's been weighing on us as Americans for a long time, but I didn't feel jubilant, just relieved.
When you saw the reaction of people who were in the streets and celebrating the death, what was your reaction to that?
There's a part of me that understands why it is people felt that way. There is this great sense of relief, and this has been hanging over our heads as Americans for a long time. But there was also a sense of discomfort I had, that somehow it felt tribal to be celebrating this death instead of recognizing that there's still a lot to be done, and the death of anyone is not a time for celebration.
Sarah, what was your initial reaction to the death of bin Laden?
We were in the heat of finals when we found out, and so I think people's main source of information was Facebook and also was Twitter, as they were procrastinating doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I think a lot of misinformation occurred, misinforming, and I think for me, when I first heard about it, I was a little bit confused, because I think even though we talk about like the war on terror a lot, it gets to be this really big amorphous idea, and less going after one person to end all of the fighting, you know. And so I think when people heard this, they really wanted this to be the thing that was going to turn everything around. And when I heard it, my first reaction was, you know, here we go, more complication and more violence.
When you see images of people waving the American flag and celebrating on TV or on the news, what was your reaction to that?
I was not entirely surprised. I did get, again, same as Sarah, my initial information was all through Facebook, and my friends and I sort of camped in front of the TV, and it was this big moment, and people wanted it to be something huge, and they wanted to mark it somehow, and it turned into a celebration. But again, echoing what the others have said, it was sort of disturbing. It felt almost wrong to be celebrating someone's death so loudly, I guess.
Reverend Chakoian, when people may hear some Christians saying, you know, maybe we shouldn't celebrate this, and some people's reaction may be, well, you know, why can't we stand up against evil? I mean, what do we say about that?
One of my friends put it really well. He said, there's a difference between justice and vengeance. That it may very well be just that this man died for all of the deaths that he caused, but having vengeance is a different reaction altogether. We can still recognize that as twisted as things had become, he had started out as a child of God, and we have to hold both of those in tension.
Sarah, how old were you, and where were you whenever the 9/11 attacks happened?
I was in 5th grade, and I remember, you know, at that time, obviously not being really informed about anything, except, you know, cartoons. But I think that I remember being at school, and I went to school about at least an hour from my house. And so I remember being at school, and someone had told me that a plane ran into the Pentagon, and I didn't know what that was. And so I was like, hey, you're just making this up. I'm gonna go like drink out of my milk carton. And so I think for me, until I went home, and I lived in Nebraska at the time, in Bellevue. I didn't truly realize the whole gravity of the situation until, we saw Air Force One flying over our house, so we're right next to Offutt Air Force Base. So I think that's when we started really understanding it. But it wasn't, unlike a lot of what people experienced, we didn't sit down as a class and watch the events unfold or anything. They kind of kept us in the dark, I think, maybe to save us from seeing those things.
Anna, how did 9/11 shape the way you look at the world?
When I found out, I was at school, and it was this sort of big, nebulous, scary thing. This bad thing had happened in the world for the first time in my life. And that was sort of almost a moment of realization that such things could happen. And I don't know that I was certainly not growing up living in fear or anything, but it became a symbol of the big and scary because of how old I was when it happened.
It reminds me a little bit, in a simplistic way, of in The Wizard of Oz, when the witch dies, and everybody gets to sing "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead." I mean, there's a part of us that kind of wants this to be that clear cut,
Exactly.
but the problem is that if there was a witch, the witches are still around, and we're also not the Munchkins. So, to get this to a deeper level and this more mature complexity of what we do now, not just as Americans, but as Christians in our lives, and how we lean into what Jesus might have wanted us to do in response to this is a whole different question.
So what model do we work off of then? How should we respond ideally to this, in your opinion?
Well, I think there are a lot of different ways we can, but for me, I go back to Jesus' teaching, and he said a lot of things. He said, love your enemies, love your neighbors, do this for the least of these, my brothers and sisters. Now, I don't think he meant that we should just pretend that there isn't any evil in the world, but I do think he calls us to a sense of responsibility and outreach, and even praying for our enemies, and working as hard as we can to make sure that there is justice in the world and that people are protected as best as possible, but that we care for all of God's children, recognizing that, we're all going to fall short, but we want to do the best we can. Gloating isn't the answer. Pretending that there isn't evil isn't the answer, but still doing the best we can to love our enemies and make this world a better place. That's where I'd go.
I agree, and I really think that what we have to remember is that even though our faith has somewhat of a blind aspect to it, whereas you're believing in something because you're taking that leap of faith, it doesn't mean that you have to blindly follow other people on earth, or other things that people tell you. Just because we read the Bible and understand and believe what it says without doing loads of research on it, it doesn't mean that you have to believe everything that people tell you. It doesn't mean that you can't take your thoughts on and think of them for yourself and just come to your own conclusions. And I guess that's what I want people my age to do, is just come to their own conclusions based on what they go out and find information-wise.
Well, Anna, Sarah, Reverend Chakoian, thank you so much for joining us today and for having this discussion on such a sensitive and important issue.
Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you. I'm Leanne Noland for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.